I'm Kyle Blakely with Mark Waller, and this is We Have Issues, podcast on local, state, and federal issues relative to Colorado. And we're here with another episode today. Mark, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, Kyle. Don't forget, tell people, like, and subscribe this podcast if you want to continue to get great content and tremendous political analysis from guys like Kyle and I. Or I should say
Yes,
dumbasses like Kyle and I.
I will try and remember that. I'm pretty good about telling people at the grocery store, but I just always seem to forget when we actually have an episode on. So um, I will remember to do that in the future. But so today we have a very interesting episode, I think, following up the assassination attempt on former President Trump this weekend. We have an opportunity to maybe understand a little bit more about the security at events like that. And so looking forward, we have former El Paso County Sheriff Bill Elder here with us coming up soon. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, Kyle, for me, here's what it's about. You have all of this stuff out there in the social media spaces talking about, every conspiracy theory from Trump planned this himself to the Secret Service is trying to off the former president. And it seems to me that's irresponsible. And there's a lot of blame already going on. We're pointing fingers at this is local law enforcement's fault. This is Secret Service's fault, somebody else's fault in this. And I think one of the things that people do often in these circumstances is they want answers and they want answers right away. And when they don't get them, they fill in these spaces on their own. And it seems to me one of the prudent things to do, and one of the things we need to be talking about is, hey, let's all just take a breath here. Let's pump the brakes just a little bit and get some understanding of how this happens, and then maybe figure out what happened and what the fix actions are moving forward.
I agree. Again, I know you've had some experience helping coordinate events like this. I know Bill's had a ton of experience. I have none. So this is actually a very educational episode for me. That's why I'm excited about it, because this is just a pure learning experience for me.
Well, then I'm just gonna make up a lot of shit about what happens at these events. No, yeah, actually, it's kind of interesting. I did get an opportunity to, yeah, I mean, I've been in a ton of these kinds of events, right, where it's either a presidential candidate, the president himself, or the vice president or vice presidential candidate showing up for one of these events. Security is pretty much the same for all of them. Once they get in the bubble, it happens the same way. And again, obviously, I've been to a ton of these events, but I actually had an opportunity back in 2016 to work one of these events. I was the local political guy that was helping coordinate an event for then vice presidential candidate Mike Pence.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never been able to get security clearance to attend one of these, so that's why I'm.
Well, it's obvious, it's your connections to the Communist Party in Colorado that have caused those problems. No, I'm kidding.
True. So what role did you play in that event? What was it like?
Yeah, so I was like the local guy that helped plan the event. So coordinated with, you start days in advance, right? Like kind of coordinating and putting the event together. Obviously, the campaign has an advance team that comes out, talks about all of the politics and how they want to work through it and interact with the crowd. And then of course, you have security advance that comes to do all the setup. How are we going to get the candidate in? How are we going to put them on stage? How are we going to keep them safe while they're here? And so there's all of this discussion about how that gets done. And I was pretty interesting. They really start ramping up a couple of days before, coming in, setting up, putting up all the piping and all the black curtains and stuff to move the candidate through the facility, to keep them isolated from other people. But it was really quite fascinating to be a part of this and to see them come in and set up. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort, and it's not just effort between. I mean, there are all of these entities involved. We seem to be talking about this in terms of local law enforcement agencies, and the Secret Service. And like, those are the only entities that are a part of this whole process. But you have the people who own the building. You have the political people that are the advanced political team that are there for the candidate. You have the political people that are from, the state or the area in which they're coming to do the discussion. It takes hundreds of volunteers that you have to have in place in one of these events. So it's a tremendous amount of coordination that goes into this.
Well, and even beyond that, to me, you're talking about how much it takes to coordinate one of these events. During an election season like this, they can have 2 or 3 of those events in one day. So it's fascinating to me, the bandwidth required, and the fact that nothing like this has happened in over 4 decades in our country, at least tells me that the system works. Maybe it didn't Saturday. Maybe there was a failure at some point, but it sure seems like it's a process that works pretty well. I just can't believe what it takes to pull it off.
Well, I think in this circumstance, from a security perspective, this is the hardest of the hard kinds of security circumstances where that you need to provide security. So, for example, the event I worked on was inside, so it was in a building. So you don't have to worry about snipers that are on buildings across the street or whatever. It's in this enclosed area inside of a building. Other events I've been at have been on Air Force installations, for example. So there's obviously a lot more security that it takes to get into the Air Force installation. And so it'd be harder for, somebody to get into that area to commit an act, or happening at the airport where, the candidate's speaking and there's no place for a person to be, a building for them to get on that's outside of the secure area. And so, it seems to me this is one where, you have it in this smaller area, you have the event in this small area, and then there are lots of buildings outside of the secured area that, could potentially, and obviously did in this circumstance, have an impact in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So incredibly difficult. And I guess back to your point about, maybe you have 2 or 3 of these events in one day, keep in mind the advanced security is different than the people that are actually on the ground for the event itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oftentimes, maybe some of the advanced people are, participating in the actual security, but they typically come in, plan for the security piece of the event. And then obviously the candidate is traveling with the security team that provides a lot of the actual security there, and then on to the next location. So it's this huge coordination of effort with, literally can be hundreds of people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, how about we bring Bill into the discussion here? And
yeah, I think he's going to have a lot to say on this, having been a part of this in the past.
Yeah.
We kind of live in a unique area where we have a lot of candidates come through, lots of presidents come into our area. I know we've been to Air Force Academy graduations when the president's been here to speak, when the vice president's been here to speak. I know Bill's worked on a ton of these out at the airport, wherever in Colorado. So I think it's awesome and unique to have his perspective on how these things work. Bill, thanks for joining us today and helping us kind of tamp down some of these conspiracy theories and rumors about what happened and what didn't happen.
Absolutely. Just to make sure you guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we got
Okay,
you.
Good.
Yep.
Good. You just
We can hear you
never
great.
know. I'm on a different device than I was last time, and I thought, well, I better check.
Well, and we'd prefer to hear you than see you, actually.
Yeah,
so it's good that we hear your voice.
My American Sign Language has kind of gone downhill in the last little bit, so that's good.
Well, and actually, this is your second visit with the podcast, so you're now part of that illustrious 2-time group.
You and Steve Schleicher. So I don't know if you want to be in the same, considered in the same group as Steve Schleicher, but yeah, you're the 2-timers.
Well, and I think Bob Gardner has been on a couple of times. So
Mark Snyder?
we'll be mailing out your 2-time pin in the
Perfect.
next couple of days.
Perfect. I'll wear it proudly the next time I get invited, and then wait for my 3rd-time pin.
Yeah, that's right.
That's funny.
Good.
So, yeah, you were talking about the number of times that I've been involved in these things. I started in law enforcement in 1978, and so I've been around this stuff quite a while, and I've been involved in a bunch of different events. From way back when Reagan was here during a visit to speak at the academy. I was assigned to the Metro Narcotics Unit back then, and stood really pretty close to Reagan. But times were just a little bit different back then. Today, I was at the academy when Trump spoke a few years ago, and just things are much tighter today than they have been. We watched this last one, and the flyover. We watched the motorcade that left with Kamala Harris, and they had an overflight. They had a helicopter overflight that participated in it. Something that you don't always see. So,
how many people does it take to coordinate security for one of these visits?
Hundreds, and everybody has. Every participating agency has a briefing about what it is that's expected, what it is that their duties are, and the advanced team comes in days before and looks over everything and draws out maps and assignments and who's going to be responsible for what and where, and typically it's they get quite a bit of time, but sometimes the protectee moves faster than they can get too much advance time. So you just never know.
Yeah.
Well, and we've been sort of talking about this, or we hear all this in the ether space. It's local law enforcement and Secret Service, kind of like local law enforcement's just one agency, but that's not even always accurate, right? I mean, how many local law enforcement agencies participate in these things?
So when a principal is coming to Colorado, for instance, and landing at the airport, when they land at the airport, they are typically met law enforcement wise, not counting Secret Service. They are typically met law enforcement wise with CSPD.
It's Springs Police Department.
Springs Police Department. They run the motorcade. They run any escorts, provided that that's the way they're moving. Sometimes these principals arrive and they'll transport by helicopter, which makes life a whole lot easier rather than shutting down an entire interstate to move a principal. But there's typically anywhere from 2 to 6, 8, I would think, counting state patrol, the sheriff's office, the police department. Depending on what jurisdictions they're moving through, they will involve those agencies. The FBI is usually involved as well. There's a lot of different agencies involved.
And here, even like even the bases would have their own law enforcement agencies.
Right. Yeah. Security forces or, military police, CID, those kinds of things would always be engaged as well.
So for an event like that, how far out in front does the coordination start?
Well, it typically will start about a week or so in advance.
That's all?
Yeah. If they've got enough, like I say, most of the advanced planning for this stuff, especially movements like you see in these campaigns where the venue changes, sometimes it changes, the day before or the day. They try to get as much time as they can because they've got to fly in a ton of stuff in order to set that up. And, the Secret Service is involved with moving anything that's involved in the motorcade. For the president, they bring the beast, the limo, and a number of different chase cars, security cars for their cat team or their cat that goes along with them. There's a lot of stuff that moves with them, and so they've got to have enough time to make sure that A, they can land the aircraft that they need to get in, and B, that they've got time to deploy all of those assets and get them set up to move. So when they come to the Air Force Academy, they typically don't need a ton more than that because they know they've been through those movements. They know the controlled environment that it is. So it's, it's a little more routine. If there is a routine, there's really no routine to it. But it's tense. It's tense.
Speak about this whole controlled environment versus I guess, less controlled environment. I tried to articulate that a little bit before you came on, but I don't think I did it justice.
And so when they move to the Air Force Academy, they know the entire academy is a secure environment. They know that you typically cannot get on the academy without going through security. You can't just drive onto the gate. And if you do, they've done some kind of measure of security while you drive on. And so they have a feeling of they don't need to be quite as heavily guarded that way. And then they put in a closer perimeter of the magnetometers that you just aren't going to get past those magnetometers armed if they don't know it. In fact, during Trump's last visit, I was set to get a photograph with him. In fact, I should dig that out. I was set to get a photograph with him, and they did not want me armed, even though I was in uniform. Luckily for me, I know most of those Secret Service guys. They trust me. They understood that I wasn't going to be standing in uniform without a firearm. And so, when I went in to shake his hand and take a picture, they were still very close. And it is so secure when you're up that close. They wouldn't let my wife Joy in the same room with us. She didn't get a chance to see him. And so it's just kind of bizarre. She had to stand behind a screen, covered by that. But and I don't know, that's just kind of the way it goes. The inner perimeter is tight. Then there's kind of a little looser outer perimeter from that. And then the big outside perimeter. So it just depends. Depends on capabilities too.
Yeah, I remember I was at, same event, different, we had different interactions, right? I think your interaction was actually at the event itself, and mine was at Air Force One.
Right.
When he got off the airplane. But yeah, similar sorts of, security. I know they had to have all of our names in advance, have, we had to go through checks prior to having that up close personal interaction. And then it's still, they was very restricted and controlled with the movements and told us what we could do, what we couldn't do. But it seems to me, one of the issues that comes into play with these sorts of events is sometimes a conflict between the campaigns and between the candidates, the principal, and their desire to have closer interactions with the public. Like, actually, I think it seems to me you're talking about Secret Service doesn't want you to have your service weapon when you're the sheriff of the county that the president's visiting, but it's good optics for him to have you there in full uniform with all of your stuff, right?
Right.
So he wants you to be there, with your service weapon, and wants to have that up close interaction with you. And so sometimes there are tensions and conflicts between, actually what the principal wants or what the campaigns want versus the security measures that are necessary to keep them safe.
Right. Well, and I think that you're absolutely right. But I also think that there's a difference between president and candidate.
Mm-hmm.
For the president, the Secret Service's job is to make sure that they protect the president,
head of government,
the United States. Right, he's the head of government, and their job is to make sure that to do anything and everything possible to protect the head of government. On a candidate, it is a principal, it is a protectee, and while he had already been the president, he is still just a candidate if there's any kind of a default there. I don't see it any differently. I don't see their movement or their protective stuff any differently, with the exception of the candidate is probably going to be able to dictate close contact a lot easier than the president of the United States will. The president of the United States is going to be able to say, I want to do this. And if they don't think that they can control it, they will tell him no. And they will dictate whether or not they give him close contact, or put him in a situation that they don't feel they can control, and they'll stop it. They literally will draw the line and say, you're not doing that. With a candidate, they may allow the candidate to make that call.
So Bill, in this instance, and I don't know how much you've studied it or looked at it or whatever, I've read a little bit about it. And again, me not knowing a thing about how these things work, I'm finding it interesting. I saw a quote from the head of the Secret Service saying local law enforcement was in that building, not on the roof, but ground floor. It was part of their responsibility, basically saying, kind of blaming them. And then I saw another response from a former Secret Service officer who said, no, regardless of who was looking at the building, the buck stops with the Secret Service there. That's their responsibility to make sure that area is secured one way or the other. So from your experience and understanding of this, where does the buck stop in that situation? Or was this just an unfortunate, confusing moment?
Well, Kyle, I think it's all of that. I think it's a conglomerate of all of those issues. I think the Secret Service is absolutely responsible for the security and the protection of the protectee. So with that, they own who they assigned or who they permitted to do certain things. So the two people that say that the Secret Service is responsible and they're always responsible, they're right in that sense. When the Secret Service says that building was under the control of locals, that is still very, very likely, and they're right. But I don't feel like you can shift that blame when you're responsible for the protectee. That doesn't mean they haven't shifted the responsibility. For instance, at the Air Force Academy, there's a very, very large hill behind the stadium. And it would be next to impossible for the Secret Service to put coverage on that outlying area or along any roadways between the two. So those are delegated to local agencies. For instance, the sheriff's office puts personnel on horseback on those hills behind the academy, and it's all restricted anyway, but they put personnel on horseback and they assume that area of responsibility. So local government in this scenario more than likely had the responsibility to maintain security in the building. It's still the authority of the Secret Service.
Okay.
Well, how do you coordinate together? So, there's been a lot of talk in this, and I've got a couple of questions here. But the first, there's been a lot of talk about, coordination between agencies in this, and maybe that plays a factor. I heard today, and this has been confirmed, that this guy was on the roof for 1 minute and 53 seconds, where people are saying to law enforcement, hey, there's a guy on this roof, 1 minute and 53 seconds before the shooting started happening. Sure. So how does the coordination happen in these events between all of these local law enforcement agencies and the federal agencies that are involved?
Well, so it'd be real nice, and we're getting closer to it. It'd be real nice if everybody were on the exact same frequency, where if party A sees or reports movement or a situation, that party C, the cat on top of that building with the sniper rifles, could actually hear firsthand what happens. And but that's just not the case. They don't allow anybody on their secure internal frequencies, and and frankly, they're running a number of different frequencies anyway. The cat group is on one because they're talking specific response should there be a threat to the protectee. The remainder of the Secret Service is on a different frequency. They're talking constantly amongst one another about movement, about do this, do that kind of thing. All the other agencies potentially could be on another single frequency, but everybody gets together. They put personnel in a command post. So party A hears something, they relate it to party B and C, et cetera. And so you have that time delay.
So, but I want to make sure I understand this correctly, because I feel like you just kind of breezed over it. So everybody's on a different frequency or potentially different frequencies, but there has to be a way for them to communicate together. And that's done through a command post. What's a command post?
So a command post is like the central operating center of this event. It could be a mobile command post. It could be a fixed command post where people sit around tables. Everybody's got radios and phones and computers, and they're monitoring that. But it'll typically be, for instance, both Colorado Springs Police Department and El Paso County Sheriff's Office have very sophisticated mobile command centers that they can be moved to a scene. There's plenty of communications in there, plenty of radio and telephone communications. There's built-in camera systems that they can raise cameras to and see ungodly distances. My guess is this is a sophisticated agency. They more than likely had a mobile command center on site, or they were in a fixed command point somewhere right there.
So I'm like the local law enforcement guy. Kyle's the Secret Service guy. We're probably sitting around this table next to each other, across from each other. I get a call from, the local law enforcement guy that's out in the field and says, hey, there's a potential threat. You might want to look at it. I'm right there to turn to Kyle and say, hey, Secret Service, you need to pay attention to this because there could be a potential threat here. Right. That's how that works?
Yeah. So you got a guy in the field standing out there. Somebody says, hey, look at the guy on the roof. Takes a second for that cop, or that person to recognize there's somebody on the roof, right? You wouldn't just arbitrarily report it unless you had, you might, but you're going to radio that in and say, hey, somebody is reporting someone on the roof of the barn, right? At that point, that person has to recognize it and then relay it.
So it just seems to me, like you said, they're getting closer to having everybody on the same frequency, but even just that slight delay could be the difference between the president or the candidate getting actually killed and being able to stop it. It seems like even if it's a 5-second delay, that's still something that by now they would have figured out how to close that gap.
Well, you have, it takes physiologically, it takes time for your brain to respond to what your eyes see, even in your own body. And, I equated this in a discussion the other day. You can practice all you want. You can practice until, the cows come home, to use an old phrase. They do it in football. They do it in baseball. In football, it's, a matter of there's 11 people on the field. Everybody knows their assignment. Everybody knows what exactly they're supposed to do on a given play, and they practice it over and over and over again. But yet, when you put that play in a scenario, it doesn't always turn out that way, right? I mean, that's why we have the outcome that we have. Well, it's the same in law enforcement. And in protective services, you practice everything that you can do at a time, but when it comes right down to it, they have to be right every single time. An assailant only has to be right once.
Well, as I was saying to Mark the other day, if this guy would have just dressed in tactical gear, he might have gone completely unnoticed, because again, if you've got different law enforcement organizations involved, they might just assume he's with one of the other guys.
Right.
So,
and so the thing that I read all of the social media stuff too, or a lot of it anyway. And the thing that I caution people is just understand that until we know, we don't know. Until we hear the facts, we don't know.
Before you get too much into that, and I do want you to talk a lot about that. But you talked about being on different frequencies and stuff, and I know people are going to have the question, why are there different frequencies? What's the purpose behind that right now? Like, why aren't they all on the same frequency?
Well, there's just, most of the time when you put people on your frequency, it takes a while to program all the equipment. Every single handheld radio, every single mobile radio has to be programmed to receive the information. The second issue is encryption.
Are they encrypted?
So yeah, that's where I was going. Is the second issue is encryption, and the sophistication of that encryption. And so for instance, the Secret Service has equipment that cannot be deciphered without specialized equipment, and they aren't going to share that with anybody, because the more they share it, the less likely it is that they can control someone encroaching on that encrypted radio communication. That's the key, is they need to be able to talk securely at every single event. So therefore, they don't want to share that as they hopscotch around the country or around the world. They rely on that interaction in a command post to communicate their issues, understanding that sometimes there's going to be a couple second delay. But like you said, Kyle, it was 1 minute and 53 seconds. I mean, in the big scheme of things, 1:53 is not it's not a huge amount of time. I mean, it's a lot if you were going to sit and hold your breath.
Yeah.
But in the big scheme of things, the amount of time that it takes your brain to recognize what your eyes are doing and then communicate the rest of your body, or communicate that to a command post and have someone else say, hey, John out there sees this. Let's get somebody to go do that. Well, then it's going to take a couple of seconds for that person to realize and move and do the things that they got to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just saying that I think time clicks by in a hurry, especially when you have an event like this, and now you're going to stop time, and you're going to go through this second by second by second, and try and over the next 6 months or so, we're going to take that 1:53 and we're going to stretch it out to being examined second by second, just like they have the Zapruder film from Texas. They've looked at every single frame of every single piece of video they can get, looking for the unknown sniper in the grass.
And we're going to Monday morning quarterback it.
Yeah.
Carry your football analogy further.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. There's the damage. That's the damage that's done. And that's what generates everybody to spin up all of these different ideas and thoughts. And in the absence of facts, people will make up their own facts.
So one other question that way, and people are like, oh, they should have had somebody on that roof, the roof that the shooter was on. How does all that work? I've tried to think about this. Like, what if the president was visiting my neighbor's house, right? Comes, we have these 5-acre lots. I've got a great vantage point view of my neighbor's house. Secret Service comes to my house and says, hey, we want you, or local law enforcement, we want to put somebody on your roof to make sure we have some sort of protection here. Hey, this is my private property. Can I tell them to go pound sand? I mean, we're not living in communist Russia, right? This isn't protecting Putin. So, I mean, obviously, I think most people would be amenable and agreeable to that, but we don't live in this sort of closed society where, law enforcement agencies can just say and do what they want. They're still subject to, if I can say this in the inverse this way, the restrictions of living in a free society that way.
Right. I mean, the Constitution protects people's private property rights. It doesn't give even the Secret Service in a protection detail, doesn't give them absolute authority. You're protected by the Fourth Amendment in your persons and property, and if you don't want someone on your roof, you don't have to allow them on your roof unless they've got an order, a search warrant.
And to your earlier point, we don't know if they even requested that and somebody said no. I mean, maybe they didn't. We don't know. But people are jumping to conclusions saying,
Right.
absolutely, this should have happened when, well, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this and you don't know all the facts.
Exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of things they could have been doing that they believed would have secured that building. But we won't know that until we sit back and we actually hear what took place. For instance, they could have already gone over, looked at that building, and decided there's a single access point to that building, that we will secure that access point. There's no way that anyone can get up on the roof and move on. And someone could have just forgotten to secure the access point, moved away. Somehow he gets up there, unbeknownst to everybody, clearly. But to jump to a conspiracy theory that, he's up there for this and that, and, the other thing, I'd have found a better shooter if that were the case.
Well, it's obvious the Trump campaign did this because of, they wanted the optics of that happening. I mean, of course, right? I mean, you've heard.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's send around 170 yards downrange and clip his ear because that's safe.
Yeah. So you have to find the right guy to be able to do that. So.
Well, and everybody knows 20-year-olds, they're great with video games, Kyle. So they're obviously the best ones at that.
Right.
Well, so they say the, local law enforcement was inside the building. They very well could have been securing what they thought was the only access point, not thinking that somebody might bring their own ladder to get on the building. So
until we know how 20-year-old shooter gets on the roof.
They said he brought a ladder.
Well,
yeah.
So if that turns out to be the truth, again, we go back to caution people to who are they, right? Who are they?
Well, I saw it in a credible news organization article today. That makes it at least halfway possible at that.
Sure. Yeah. And, I just, again, I would caution people to wait to hear the final outcome. That's the dangerous piece of jumping in, even when they say this. How do you give credibility to who they are, right? I mean, I hate doing air quotes.
Yeah.
Who are they, and what did they really mean, and what did they really know?
Well, why? And explain. I know you've had some personal experience here. Why is it so important for people just to say, all right, let's take a breath. Let's not jump to any conclusions. Let the investigation happen. Let that play out the way it's supposed to, because, all these people that don't have access to all the information are making these claims. I'll give you a perfect example. Initially, as this is happening, they put a mug of a guy, claim that he's from Antifa, out online saying, the Butler Police Department's arrested this guy. This is the guy that did it. Turns out he's an Italian blogger that talks about soccer. So help us understand, why is it important for people that are out there that want to fill up this space that, someone might think are, honestly trying to put out information they feel is accurate and credible, but unless you're there, unless you have the inside knowledge of what's going on, it is impossible to put accurate data out there. So why is it important for people to just step back, take a breath, and let these investigations happen the way they're supposed to?
Absolutely. So I'll give you some context. Most people remember the night that the Club Q shooter went into Club Q and shot and killed a bunch of people using an AR style rifle, right? I mean, the typical heinous multi-round death machine that it is. And so immediately following that, a news media, a local Colorado Springs news media, makes the connection between the Club Q shooting that was ongoing and an event that happened a year earlier in El Paso County, where the shooter barricaded himself and threatened to blow up the house, et cetera, et cetera. And then came the link of the video and the description of how this guy was arrested, and that, you know, for this reason or that reason, he was allowed to get his guns back, to include vilifying me for not following, you know, a red flag order that would have somehow prevented this Club Q shooting. And this spun itself into the national discussion to include some very pointed commentary from Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson named me personally. Sheriff Bill Elder failed to do his job. Sheriff Bill Elder failed to protect the people of El Paso County in not keeping those guns away from him, and therefore allowing him to go out and do this heinous deed. He was wrong. He was flat out wrong. Here's the problem. I couldn't defend myself. First off. Second off, he never called to ask. He never called to ask me, hey, did you do this? He didn't care. He just wanted to mouth off. I lost a ton of respect for Tucker Carlson right then. The fact of the matter was, when he was arrested by El Paso County Sheriff's Office, we not only seized the guns, we seized bomb-making equipment, we searched the house, we took everything away from him, and we still had it in our evidence room. And it was there the day that the Club Q shooting took place. We had done everything we could. He was in custody. He was barred by that arrest from acquiring any new ammunition, and we all knew it. Therefore, the use of red flag or anything else would have been completely immaterial. Therefore, all of the basis that had gone on was contained inside that investigation and that prosecution. And when the prosecution dropped later, because of whatever reason, it's almost immaterial why it dropped, but we go back to that case was dismissed shortly before shortly afterwards, he has everything sealed in the court record. And he is essentially, that entire case is essentially erased. And by state statute, we can't talk about it.
Sealed because he was a juvenile?
Sealed because the case was dropped, and there's a statute that had been enacted not long ago that says you can't talk about it because it didn't happen. You can't use anything from that previous case to do anything future because it didn't happen. So it gets sealed. Can't even discuss it in public. I couldn't stick up for myself. If Tucker Carlson would have called and I would have discussed it with him and told him, hey, really, Tucker, we've got all this stuff, that would have said I would have violated it. As a matter of fact, his attorneys say that I did, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. They filed a motion against me to say that I had violated that state statute when I did not. In any case, we could not even use the fact that had happened before as law enforcement to get a red flag order after the case was dismissed, even a year after the fact. He didn't have the original guns. He couldn't get any new guns because he was in custody. When he got out of custody and filed to have the case sealed, we couldn't talk about it, so we couldn't use it to develop an affidavit to get a red flag order, even if we would have wanted one. But he lived in the city.
What does that mean for a circumstance like this?
Well, what it means is that we should take a deep breath and wait for the facts to come out, and not always assume that that there's some kind of conspiracy theory and that they're going to give you a twisted view of the facts. You'd have to assume in this case, there's probably, I will make you a bet, there's probably 100 or more law enforcement officers from local agencies through the Secret Service and the FBI, et cetera, on within 100 yards of the principal in that event, 200 yards, 300 yards. To assume that there's a conspiracy means every single one of them's got to be involved in the conspiracy, or a majority of them. I think that's just ludicrous. It's ludicrous to think that somebody's going to hire this 20-year-old guy, and he's going to be the focus of an attempt to kill President Trump. I think it's ridiculous. So there has to be a reason that this happened, but it doesn't have to be so notorious that that we have
That's
to
some giant conspiracy.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
I got off on a tangent on Tucker Carlson. I spun up about that. I stay spun up about that because here's a guy that is very well thought of in the media, at least by a lot of people, and he's flat out wrong. But yet I call him and I leave a message. Hey, have him call me. I'd like to talk to him about it. This is why. Not a word.
And
so he calls me.
It doesn't help
what's
with
what kills me
ratings
in those circumstances. They want to be first. They want to have the answer. They want to get out there to talk to their listeners. And in that circumstance, let's say he had come back and apologized at some point and gone on air and said, hey, I got it wrong. It really doesn't matter, right? Because it's already out there.
Right.
He's already said it. And that's the clip that people are going to tune into and focus on.
I had, for a period of time, I had hundreds of phone calls to my admin assistant, hundreds, nasty emails, commentary. We had people protesting in front of the sheriff's office because of that. And a lot driven by Tucker Carlson's response, because people believe him. People believe, when you've got KRDO or KOAA or whatever, and they've got their investigative reporters out there, and while they're doing a service, they don't always tell the whole story. And so until you actually get the facts together and you can see the facts and we string them out and we can say, this is what happened, there will become an aha moment where somebody reads through these facts and they go, that's what happened. And that's what we got to wait for, and not come up with some cockamamie theory like you read in social media. Social media is the worst. Anyway.
It's
definitely.
I agree with you.
Absolutely.
Well, Kyle, you want to wrap this up for us?
Yeah, I didn't have any other questions. Mark, I don't know if you did or not, but Bill, I just wanted to thank you for doing this. Like I said, coming into this for me, this was going to be a purely educational episode, and I've really got a lot out of it, learned a lot. I really think our listeners are going to get some additional perspective on this situation, and hopefully, like both you and Mark have said, everybody will kind of take a step back and wait to see what the investigation unveils. And so really, really appreciate your perspective on this.
And I think that's the moral of the story here, right? Let's take a breath. Wait, let the investigation happen. We don't have all of the evidence. We're not privy to that. We weren't there. Let the professionals do their job.
Right. I get disappointed when I read commentary, right, wrong, or indifferent, about, this was some kind of shot at Trump from the left. This was a shot at Trump from, this, that, or the other thing, the Antifa guy. Everybody's got a comment. When you read, every politician's got to make a comment. Where, you had people lose their lives.
Yeah.
To include the shooter. And you don't know what his motive was yet. You don't know what his mental capacity was at the time, but how about we just be compassionate about the people that lost their lives? We're compassionate about the fact that Donald J. Trump was the target of an assassination attempt. Let's be compassionate for him, and let's do the right thing and wait for the time, the investigation to play out, and be that way, and not just try and pass on vitriol. And it's just stupid.
Good advice. Very good advice. Well, Bill, thanks again
You're welcome.
for coming on. I'm sure you'll be back to join us on at some point in the future. So we always look forward to talking to you.
I appreciate that. I enjoy it.
We love having you on, and not just because you do it for free.
Yeah, well, that's going to come to an end here pretty quick.
All right.
Congratulations.
Send your fee agreement to our agent, and we'll take a look at it.
Yeah. Just don't call him again. No. All right. We'll see you guys.
Take care, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bill.
That was great. I like I said, I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, and I think it's important. What's great is, you're in a position where you want to learn, and hopefully our listeners are there too. And they don't want to just fill this space up showing people how smart they are by, looking at a couple of pictures online and coming up with the answer and the final solution here. I mean, I thought he did a great job of articulating. This takes hundreds of people to coordinate these events. And if this was some sort of conspiracy, man, loads of people would have to be in on it.
You bet. You bet. So a lot happened in the last week and stuff. Is there anything specific that's annoying you this time, or have
this whole episode was about that, right?
Yeah.
It was about, talking to those people specifically that want to get out over their ski tips and, vilify one agency or another agency in this circumstance, saying this should have happened, that should have happened. Listen, we are not professionals in this arena. Not one of us has ever planned one of these events or know what goes into it. And it's just incredibly irresponsible to, watch 20 minutes of video online and say you got the answer when you're not there, you're not an expert, you're not a part of understanding of how this kind of stuff happens. Let the professionals do their effing jobs.
Yep. I agree. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it. And we will be back next week with another episode. Still not exactly sure who's going to join us, but I know we're trying to get Jeff Hurd on, who's running against Adam Frisch, who we had on recently. So our listeners can get both sides of that race. So hopefully we'll be able to get Jeff on. But if not, we'll probably start taking a look at some of the ballot issues, the numerous ballot issues that are going to be on the Colorado ballot this fall.
And as always, I mean, we provide mediocre analysis constantly. And if you want to continue to get this mediocre analysis, what do you need to do?
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. Take care, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye.